Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. It's been a while since I've done a 1v1 Arabia tier list, and since I've been playing a lot of 1v1 games on my road to 3000 ELO, which I haven't gotten there yet, but I've played a lot of 1v1 games, and I kind of have a good feeling, a good grasp of the meta right now and what civilizations are doing well. So I've got my 5 categories, and there's been a bunch of changes over the last few months. Nothing crazy in terms of a huge balance patch, but a bunch of little changes that add up. And the last tier list I made of this was in January. So this will be for October 2024. And like I said, there's been a bunch of changes since then. And no better time than the present for me to make this tier list. I won't be making it based on, my personal takes or what I prefer to play. I'll be basing it more on what I believe is performing the best. And just as always, I have the 5 categories here. Listen, the bad civs are not unplayable. It's not like they can never win. It's just that they have weaknesses and they have things that, kind of make them a little bit, easy to take advantage of. And then the OP civs are going to be like a lot easier to play, a lot better, a lot more consistent, etc. And just as a disclaimer, guys, in lower brackets, lower elo brackets, or like for beginners, this tier list will not be that important to follow. Like if you like one of the bad civs, you can still win with it. You can still play with it, no problem. I would still argue though that even for beginners or newer players or at lower brackets, whatever it is, mid elo, anything, the higher civs on this tier list will be performing better than the lower civs across 1,000 games. But this tier list will be based on the highest level because at the end of the day, that's where the civilizations are shown to be weak or strong for the most part. So with all that said, we're going to go alphabetically here, starting with Armenians. We're going to throw them in the viable side of things. I think the Armenians are quite often looked at as a civilization that does well on water maps because a lot of its bonuses are good for that. But I think it has a lot of merits on land maps as well because it has a great economy and it also has a really good Dark Age to early Imp. The problem with Armenians and where I think it really falls off is that the late Imp for Armenians is really bad. I would argue that you need to have 5 or 6 relics to have a chance in late game against most civs. Otherwise, you're just dead. You don't have very good cav. You don't really have the craziest backline units. The unique unit's not bad, though. And you also lack Bombard Cannon. You lack Siege Ram. You lack Siege Onager. So you're kind of like stuck to play with like monks, champions, and like, basic, like not the greatest light cav, and then unique unit as the backline. So you're a bit limited on options. But I think their 100 HP champs are not bad. Like very solid. It's just, not the craziest late game. Next up, we have Aztecs. I think the civilization has had a crazy fall from grace. I've been going back and forth with the Aztecs. I think overall, though, I would probably put them as a subpar civ at the moment, which is the craziest. This is the lowest I've ever put Aztecs, and it's really crazy to have them here. If you check other tier lists, I almost always have Aztecs at A or S. So to throw them at, it's going to be top of C, to be clear, but to throw them at C feels insane. Now, to justify this decision, I would say that the Aztecs still have some really good strategies and still have, if you get the Eagle, Monk, Pike in Castle Age, you're going to kill most civs. If you get 5 relics in late game, you're going to kill most civs because you have like a really strong advantage. But right now, Cav Archers are making a really, big comeback into the meta. And Cav Archers kind of destroy the things that Aztecs like to go for. They like to go for Eagles. Cav Archers can kite them down. Monks, Cav Archers can also do pretty well against. The mobility issue, Cav Archers kind of exploit the fact that Aztecs have no cavalry. And Aztecs just playing skirms or archers is not bad, but you're not really playing towards your strengths when you play only skirms and archers. Like it's kind of easy to play against someone that only has skirms and archers and doesn't even have cavalry to pair with them, and doesn't really scale that all that well either. Like Aztec late game is not particularly great either. So it just feels like a civ that has to play towards infantry and it's a bit easier to counter. And on top of that, it doesn't have the craziest early game like Feudal Age because you don't really have that many bonuses that help you in Feudal Age. Their bonuses are more geared towards like, the mid game and economy and all that. So the Aztecs just feel like they're not performing too well right now. Still think they're a decent civ, just nothing crazy. Next up, we've got the Bengalis. I think the Bengalis are an awkward civ to play 100%, but they feel like pretty decent to play overall. Whenever I get them, I feel like they're okay. But I would say it's like a decent anti-meta civ. So if you like to play like anti-meta and you don't want to play with like the classic like Cav Archers, Knights, crossbow line, playing Bengalis is nice because usually Bengalis have to make use of like maybe a few light cav, maybe some Ratha, some monk push, some elephant push, They get to like different units and a bit more unique units, which I think could be fun. So if you like an anti-meta civ, I think Bengalis are okay. But as far as them like beating out a lot of other civs, I don't think they're like that great at like beating a lot of other civs. I think they're like just an okay, strong. If you catch your opponent off guard, they'll do well, kind of thing. Decent late game though. Next, you have Berbers. I think Berbers are going to be a solid like bottom B tier. The civilization feels really good, especially in a cav archer meta, because getting into cav archers. If also, I'm going to be mentioning cav archer meta. Check out my video about the cav archer meta switch or meta shift if you haven't already, to explain that. That will give you some clarity on the situation. Cav archers are not like everywhere, but they are pretty impactful in higher elo. But I would even say like even in like lower brackets, in lower elo brackets, Berbers tend to perform very well because like cheaper knights. I think knight is like the best like lower elo unit, to be honest with you, especially for beginners. Highly recommend knights for beginners. I think Berbers absolutely stomp players with like cheaper knights. So Berbers to me feel like a mid of B tier, maybe even slightly better than Armenians, to be honest, because the civ just has really strong options to go into, and the only weakness it has is just a very slow Dark Age and Feudal Age. As soon as it gets to mid game, it turbos. It's really strong. Late game, it's missing like Halb and Stop Counting. It has everything else you can ask for. I guess Halb and Arbalest are the two things you miss. But you also have Genitours to take care of Archer civs. So Berbers have options for everything. And the Camel Archer is also a very relevant, unique unit. So I would say middle or upper B tier for the Berbers. Next up, we have the Bohemians. Would probably throw Bohemians into the same category as Bengalis as an anti-meta civ. But I actually think they're way better than Bengalis as an anti-meta option. It's a really tricky civ to play, but gunpowder and castlage is really good. Going heavy on stone and gold and like castle dropping for unique units, or like fast imperial age in some cases. You can go for boom and pick up relics, and you have fervor and sanctity on your villas plus monasteries and monks to defend. You have so many like decent anti-meta options with the civ. Chemistry expos as well is not bad, and it's kind of a tricky civ to play against. So I think when you play Bohemians, you just want to not play like a standard like scouts or archers game. You don't want to go infantry. You want to play like a little bit defensive, few more walls, maybe a defensive range, like a few archers, but don't like necessarily play like into 2-range expo or like crossbow knights. You want to like think about your unique options with the civ. Really strong anti-meta civ for sure, or off-meta civ, I should say. Next up, we have the Britons. Unfortunately, the civ is definitely in the subpar range at the moment. I would even say maybe even below Bengalis. Like the civ feels like it's had such a fall from grace. It's very simple, guys. Crossbows are quite weak at the moment. They received a bunch of nerfs, and Britons just don't have any great options besides crossbows. And on top of that, they don't really have like the craziest like early, mid, or late game. Like they're kind of just never that strong. And having extra range on crossbows used to be insane when it was crossbow versus crossbow very often. But now like elite skirmishers are just bodying Britons left and right. The knight civs and like knight elite skirm is just so strong, hard to deal with. I feel like Britons need a perfect map to be able to play. Like you need to have 3 TC, perfect map in order to have like a good late game. You can't have an open map and you get raided to death. You can't have a massive forward siege in front of you or else, or a forward big hill in front of you or else you get forward sieged. And you also can't fight too much because they don't have bloodlines. So like big fights, big engagements, not really that good for Britons. So honestly, this civilization needs like a perfect case scenario on 1v1 Arabia to be able to win games consistently. Bulgarians, unfortunately, are going to be in the bad category. Civilization is fine for lower brackets, but for high elo, basically gets no economy bonus whatsoever. The only savings you get is you save 50 stone per town center, which is, let's be honest, kind of negligible. Like you're gonna, even if you drop 2 TC right away, you save 100 stone, and then that 100 stone, what is it doing? It's sitting in your stockpile. It's not like you can use it on anything else. So like you're saving the worst early game resource, and you're not saving that much of it either. Bulgarians overall just don't feel that great at all as far as like developing through the game. The best thing that the civ has is that you save resources when paying for upgrades, which is not bad, and you get free meta arm, which is not great because meta arm are like kind of out of the meta at the moment. So like this civilization has to make something happen, has to put pressure, and usually it's just is unable to find damage, which is why Bulgarians are not that great. Next we have Burgundians. Burgundians haven't changed too much from like recent tier lists. I think they've always kind of hovered around mid level. I'd probably put them right behind Berbers at the moment. I think if you have a good map with Burgundians, you can do quite well. Or if you're able to like go scouts into wall, it's quite decent. But Burgundians, unfortunately, are one of those civilizations that died to CA. And we're in a CA meta, and CA can definitely kill Burgundians quite easily because their best options are usually like Cavalier and Custodia, and both of those kind of die to Cav Archer. And usually they want to pick up relics, and Cav Archer is very good at denying them relics. So Burgundian might be forced to go Cav Archer themselves, you might think, but unfortunately they don't get bloodlines, so you can't really do that effectively. So Burgundians are kind of just left behind in the CA meta. That being said, they can still play light Cav and try to contest, or maybe elite skirm. And maybe in some matchups they can do quite well if you get the relics, but you know, not the craziest civ ever. Just kind of a middle of the pack civ. Next up we have Burmese. I think the civ is quite good, honestly. Personal opinion, I think the civ is quite good. I'd probably stick it somewhere around like this area. It's also an anti-meta civ. Like this is what people don't understand about Burmese. It's like you can't just play scouts into knights or elite skirm versus crossbow and expect not to get punished. Yeah, it has weaknesses. You are missing the last armor for elite skirm. Burmese are considered very weak by a lot of players. But what people don't realize is that the Arambai, I made a short about this the other day, it destroys crossbow. Like it's not even close. So what you want to do with the civs, you want to play like an anti-meta style. You open scouts or militia or whatever. Then you get to like the castle age, and you can go with like a monk siege defense while picking up relics, or a small monk siege push with light cav and knight, whatever. And then you want to develop into either, you know, knights, strong like light cav raids, halberdier versus cav civs, monk halb versus cav civs, or just a Rambai Hussar against archer civs. You have options. It's just hard to like use those options effectively. But you do have options with Burmese, and it also has a really strong phosphor rush, which is worth mentioning. Fast castle Arambai is not bad. I'd probably stick it right here though. I think that's a good place for Burmese. Not a bad civ. Next we have Byzantine. I personally don't like the civ very much, but it's a completely personal thing. I think the civ is very strong. It's not a civ that gains initiative easily because you don't really have economy bonuses. You get economy bonuses over time by saving resources on making army, and then you also have a cheaper imperial age. So it's one of those civilizations that doesn't really get initiative, but does a really good job of fighting and trading against your opponents. You also get free town watch, town patrol, which is incredibly good on defense, plus higher HP buildings, including walls, which is really good. I would say Byzantines is like an A tier civ. It has very little bad matchups too. I would say the only bad matchups it has are really like mesocivs, and then like select few civilizations that are like slightly better than Byzantine. Like Portuguese can do double gold comp very easily. Saracens can be somewhat tricky here and there. But overall, I would say Byzantine end up just doing really well overall. And one thing I learned recently is that cataphracts destroy camels. And fun fact, Hindustani have 0 answers to cataphract in late game. Not a single unit that beats cataphracts from Hindustani. I learned that in a 1v1 game against Yo. It's crazy, but think about everything Hindustani have. The closest you get is hand cannoneer, and even those are just not enough to like kill cataphracts. Cataphracts can run on them, charge on them, and trample damage will wipe the hand cannoneer. So it's such a sick unit, such a sick civilization. I'm gonna put it at A tier, even though, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of it. Credit where credit's due. Celts might be another civilization to throw in the bad category. The civ is quite clearly lacking options, but I think I'm going to throw it in the subpar, to be honest with you. Because every time I play Celts, I feel like the game is winnable. Like, the economy advantage you get, and the power spike you have with Siege being strong in Castle, and on top of that, Woad Waiter being a good late game unit, I think all of those factors together are enough to make Celts like a reasonable threat. I think where Celts suffer is if you're in like a knight versus knight fight, and then like Celts have no good options because you don't get bloodlines, you can't really use siege, and switching to pikes, it's like okay, but the Celt pikes are not that great. They just move a little faster, you know, so it's not exactly the best position to be in. And I think a lot of times as a Celt player, you could find yourself in that situation. And even like a crossbow versus crossbow war, you get the nice siege, but then you don't scale to Arbalest, so that feels awkward as well. So the civ is awkward. It's again an anti-meta civ. It's an off-meta civ. But if played correctly, I think it has some merit, and its economy bonus is quite nice. Next up, we have the Chinese. I'm going to save some time on this one. It's been pretty much one of the best civs in 1v1 Arabia for a long time now. The new start for Chinese, though, is even better than how it was before, because now we have the new hotkey as well, the drop-off resource hotkey, which makes the Chinese start super silky smooth. So I'm a huge fan of the Chinese after that change. I think Chinese become easier to play as well. So if you're looking for a solid, consistent, well-rounded civ to play, I think Chinese is a really good option for you. And the start is not that hard right now after that hotkey has been introduced. So yeah, it just does everything you need. It's been the best civ for a while. If nothing goes wrong in the early game, you're up 2 vils from the start of the game, and you also have a wide open tech tree and a great mid game. So as far as like playing a civilization and looking to win consistently, the Chinese are pretty much like the go-to civ for that kind of style. Next we have the Cumans. I think the Cumans are like an okay civ, kind of an anti-meta civ again. There's a lot of anti-meta civs, but that's why the game is good, by the way. Like, they have a lot of civs that do weird things, and you have to keep it in mind, which is why I think the civ is good. Oh, sorry, the game is good. I don't know where to place Cumans. I think they're like, yeah, I think they're like okay. You can play them standard. You save like a little bit of wood for all your production buildings, but the best way to play Cumans is probably the 2TC boom. I think a mix of those two strats is not bad, or like 2TC boom while doing something else is also not bad. I think having that mind game with Cumans is nice. I spoke about this in a past tier list, and the same is true. Like, it can either be the best in the game if you get away with the 2TC boom, or it could be the worst in the game if you get punished when you go for 2TC boom. So that's the thing with the Cumans. It's like, if you get like the perfect scenario where you're able to boom with them, they are insane. If you get any other scenario, they're nothing special. But sometimes having that mind game is also really impactful. So if you like the anti-meta, it's decent to commit to Cumans and to try them out. Next we have Dravidians. I think Dravidians, no matter how hard I try, I don't think I can put them too high up, but I think I'll probably throw them in subpar. I don't mean to isolate the Bulgarians and make them the only civ in the bad category, but the thing is, like, Dravidians have decent options. Like, they have Arbalest Hal Bombard Cannon, which is one of the better comps to go for. The problem I have with Dravidians, no Cav Archer, no Knight. Like, you're missing, like, core units. Like, same with Bengalis, right? But you don't have Bloodlines. You can't even go Light Cat. Like, you're missing, like, core options that make the civ just impossible to play in certain scenarios. So I think the civ has a lot of bad matchups. I think it's really easy to play against, but you do get nice power spikes with it, and the late game is not horrible. Wood Steel is actually quite good. So my opinion right now is not bad, but it's definitely subpar. Next, Ethiopians. This is a classic example of like a viable civilization. Nothing special, nothing bad. I'll probably throw them a little bit behind Berbers though, just because I feel like Berbers are playing with a bit more of like the meta options right now. Cavalry seems to be performing slightly better than Archer Line, and Ethiopian is like an Archer Line based civ. That being said, though, the civilization actually has a really strong Shotel option. Shotel warriors have been performing quite well from what I've seen from them. So yeah, Shotel is like, don't sleep on it. It's not that good, but like, don't sleep on it as well. But yeah, this civ just has really nice power spikes, strong Archer Line, really good late game, underrated late game. And usually, if you're able to control the game with Ethiopians, you can also hit some really nice timings, which I enjoy. I like the civ a lot. It might be the best archer civ in the game. Or like the best civ that gets a bonus on archers. But actually, Mayans exist, so scratch that. But it's one of the better archer civs for sure. Okay, moving on. We got the Franks. I think it's hard to justify anything higher than B tier for Franks right now. The CA meta kind of killed the civ really hard. Like, the civ, I know this is like a noob stomping civ, and like it's really good for beginners. That's all true. But right now, CA destroy Franks really hard. And I think the Franks has always been a civ that dies to select Archer Halb civs as well. So I would say Franks are not bad. They're kind of like unchanged. They're like always been good, easy to play, simple, but nothing special. That's kind of how I feel about Franks right now. But they're a smooth civ to play. Also, Frank CA is not bad. You do get an extra 10 HP, and you don't have to pay for bloodlines, so it can be okay. But I don't like it that much. Next, you have Georgians. That's the best civ in the game right now, I think. I'm like 90% sure it's the best civ in the game. I'm making a whole video dedicated to why I think the civ is the best in the game. It might already be posted when I post this video. I'm recording them same day. Or maybe it comes out later. It depends about my editor. But check out that video if you haven't already. I go in depth about the Georgians. But basically, I think they're the best civ in the game. And I also think if you're looking for a civilization to grind the ladder, I think the Georgians are the best civilization to do that right now. I have a build order, 17 pop no loom, or even like 17 pop with loom. It's your choice. Scout rush with Georgians, and I think, like, no joke, that's a new stomping build order, 100%. Like that is the strategy and the civ to climb the ladder fast right now. I don't want to make that too public because I know my words have an impact on the ladder, and I don't want it to be like AIDS to play the ladder. Everyone's just spamming Georgians, right? So obviously, like, learn to play the game properly. Maybe mix up your civs. But if you're looking to like really get higher elo and you want to like break 1,000 elo or whatever, get to 1,400 for the first time ever, whatever you want to do. If you're looking at get elo goals and like climb ladder fast, Georgians with that builder, easiest way to do it. Easiest way to do it. And yeah, not much else to be said about that one. Watch the other vid for in-depth Georgians breakdown. Next up, we have the Goths. I think the Goths are honestly not that bad of a civ. I played them a bunch recently, and they are just not that bad. Like, the civ got a huge boost from having the hunt bonus early game. It's way better than you expect. I would actually prefer to have the Goths over all of these civs, and it's not even that crazy to say. So I put them in the upper C tier. They are still subpar because they are a little bit one-dimensional in the late game. They're a little bit slow in the mid game as well. They have certain things about them that are, a little bit, easy to counter. Like, a lot of their bonuses are towards infantry. So if you're playing infantry, you'll get your bonuses, but then infantry are also like the worst units in the game right now. And if you're not playing infantry, then you have no bonuses, which is the problem with Goths in the mid game. But early game, get a nice hunt bonus. So scout rush plus spears mixed in, very solid. Goth CA. Nothing wrong with it in the early game. You're missing thumb ring, so it doesn't scale very well. But you have heavy CA, you have bracer. It's actually a decent option. So I'm liking the Goths a lot lately. There's two plays I like with the Goths. I like to open scouts and spears most of the time, because that's the way to get like access to infantry discount without going men at arm and militia. I hate those strategies. They're so bad. So that's like my take. This is a high level strat right now we're talking. Men at arm and militia are better at like lower brackets. If you like going for them, go for them. It's fine. It's just I think that they're not consistent. Whatever, I can go on for ages, but my favorite is scout into spear, and then in the mid game you either go into CA, or if your opponent's on like skirms and you can't go CA, then you go for or like not skirms, but like he can be on like skirm, or like he can be on like stable as well, and you want to surprise him, right? Then you can go for a longsword play, which is insane. I think like going 4 or 5 barrack longsword with Goths and all in longsword in the cast stage is so good. And you might be thinking, like, why would the opponent be on skirm if you open, like, scouts? But you go scouts with spears. You spend, like, 10 spears forward. So your opponent either has to go, like, crossbows or something weird like that, or, like, skirms to defend those. And then it opens up the line for you to go for the longswords. So, yeah, that's the way to do it. Those are my two favorite strats with the Goths right now. So next up, we have Gurjaras. I think the civ is actually bottom of A tier. It's really good right now. Number one, it does well in the CA meta. It has shawarma riders that are amazing in CA, camels that are amazing in CA. Or not amazing, but pretty good against CA. Especially at lower levels where it's hard to micro. I think Gurjaras are really, really good at the moment. Because like camels just beat like all knights, and shawarma riders beat most range units, especially with bad micro or with no micro. But on top of that, I think the civ just has amazing scaling. Like you have the unique tech for cheaper food units. You have really good options. The unique unit is quite solid. The early game is good. Civ just has no weaknesses, but it is an anti-meta civ. Like you don't get Cav Archer, and you also don't get like Nightline. So civs that don't get like regular units will always be anti-meta for me or off-meta for me, 100%. Because for me, the meta with Age of Empires is the Archer line and the Scout / Knight line. Those two are like the bread and butter of the game. So if you don't have either of those two options, you're always going to be like a weird civ. Like Bulgarians are anti-meta in that regard. Spanish, you don't get crossbow, it's an anti-meta civ in that regard. If you're lacking Cav Archer, you're lacking these like basic units, you're always going to be like an off-meta civ or an anti-meta civ in some way. You can't just play standard games and get away with it. But Gurjaras, you don't play standard, but you have really good options in its own right. And Yeah, it's quite a hard civ to play, but quite good. Next we have Hindustani. I think this one is probably top of A. The civ is like almost OP. And it has a really good win rate, but I just think that the OP civs just beat Hindustani, and that's the only reason it's not OP. That's my take on it. It has one matchup against the OP civs. You'll see that I don't want to spoil, but it does well against only one of the OP civs, or maybe two of the OP civs. But I think maybe not even. Depending on how I'm going to make the tier list, I don't think it has any good matchup against the OP civs. But we'll talk about that later. But Hindustani, really strong. Again, missing like the classical options, no knights. But the camels are really good, well-rounded. And the economy is also really strong. And you get the Gulam to counter archer civs. And you get one of the best late games in the game. It's like your texture in late game is disgustingly good. So, yeah, civ feels really good. Basically doesn't lose to anything. Except Cataphract in late game. But everything else you beat in late game for the most part. And it just has trouble beating the OP civs, but everything else it has usually a good matchup against. Next up, you have the Huns. It's a CA meta, so I actually like the Huns a lot more right now. Before people discovered how good CA were and how easy it is to just get into the CA kind of game, I didn't like Huns a lot, but I'm gonna bump them a lot more right now. So I'd probably throw them somewhere like right here. Yeah, right here I think is nice. I think the civ still has a lot of weaknesses. You still struggle to full wall. You still have to like fight a lot, take a lot of risks with it. But I feel like if you play smart and you play towards your strong units, it ends up performing quite well. Huns is either a civ that you either love it or you hate it. So I'll leave this one up to you. But the way I see it is that the civ is quite decent right now. And also has a reasonable early game, so I think it's fine. It just has like a weak late game, and also has like bad matchups against like camel civs. That's why Huns can never be the best civ in the game unless they get overbuffed. Like this civ is either broken or will always lose to its counters, right? That's the problem with it. Like it always dies to camel civs. It always dies to like skirm camel civs especially. Like those civs just eat Huns for breakfast like most of the time. So the Huns up against the camel civs or the strong OP civs, you have to get lucky. Or like, outplay your opponent. It's always an option. Next we have Incas. The civ is not bad. It's not like OP anymore. I would probably put it at bottom of A tier at the moment. I think it's not the worst civ ever against like the better civs. It has some decent matchups, but the main issue I have with the Incas is that you lack the cavalry, and that's the problem that all meso civs have. But Incas, the economy doesn't feel insane. In fact, the best play with Incas, I feel like, is just playing a lot of skirms and spears. That's like the best play I think with Incas, and then having that eagle switch in the back pocket is like the best way I see the civs played at the moment. If you play full eagles, you struggle against CA, and if you play towards like you don't really have any like playing towards crossbow line feels weird. You don't really get any discounts. So, in my opinion, the best way to play it is like skirm spear with a few eagles, and then like either all in eagle in castle or switch to eagle in imp feels good. Even imp just spamming like trash units plus monks is also really good. So civ feels like okay to play throughout the game, but I think where it really shines is just spamming a lot of units and trading like how the Byzantines do that as well. I think that's the best position for Incas at the moment. Best way to play the civ. Has really decent options as well, like siege ram, etc. in late game to go for. Slinger's always good. You never die to longsword, so yeah, you just have some matchups like Incas Goths. Like Goths have like no chance if they don't win early. Next we have Italians. I think this is like the perfect example of like a subpar civ that's always like decent. Like I think Italians is like always good. I'll probably put them right here. It's like always decent. A lot of the bonuses and tech tree for Italians is geared towards naval play. But I think that the bonuses they get for land maps are very relevant, like getting to the next age faster. Their tech tree is insane. Their late game is insane. Arbalest, Hussar, Cannon, like you can't really complain about anything. Genoese crossbow also win you some matchups, so the civ feels good overall. I like the civ a lot. But it's also just not that good because it doesn't get that many good bonuses for land maps. Oh no, I forgot about the civ. This civ is gonna upset a lot of people. Spirit of the Law will hate me for this, but I think the civilization here, the Japanese, is really not that good. I think the civ is so easy to play against, to be honest with you. I can't remember the last time I lost the Japanese, honestly. Um, I genuinely can't remember the last time I lost to Japanese. They are not that good at the moment. I would put them right here. The only thing that they're good at the moment is just getting to CA and having CA being good. Everything else for the Japanese is lackluster at the moment. And the reason for that is like militia, men at arm, they're just not that good. I made a video in the unfortunate state of infantry if you want to know more about that. But infantry right now are just not performing very well. And so Japanese, by default, lose a lot of their spark, lose a lot of their bonuses. A lot of them are geared towards infantry. And they lack so many options in late game. Like no bomber cannon, no +4 armor on cav. You have champion, halb, arbalest. Samurai are not bad. The trebs are not bad, but your economy is not great past early game as well because you only get savings on like the eco buildings, which is not that crazy past like I said the first few minutes of the game. So the Civ feels like it has an okay early game, but not enough to win. And then it has it's just like decent for the rest of the game, but it has a bad late game. And I don't like that at all. And even if you get the CA, this is the problem I have with Japanese. You get the CA, you don't even have good light cap to pair them up with. You have just decent or subpar light cap to pair them up with. So you don't even have like CA Hussar like other Civs do. So unfortunately, guys, the Civ is just not great at the moment. Has some decent matchups and it's maybe fun to play, but it's just not that good at the moment. I could bump it a bit more if you guys want some grace for the Civ. Like maybe it's better than Cumans, but I would even say probably not. But like maybe. So it depends. Do I want to upset people? I know it's a fan favorite, but I don't know, guys. I'll leave it here. But it could get bumped up to here or maybe here. I prefer Goths to Japanese. I think that's the state we're in at the moment. Fine, I'll put it here. I'll put it there. Next, you have Khmer. I'm gonna put this as probably right here. For me, I think the Civ is S tier, but that's a personal opinion. For the majority of people, I think the Civ is like really strong, good economy, solid units, but has some holes in the tech tree as the game goes on, has some weaknesses to camel Civs. Sometimes in a scout war, you skip your barracks with Khmer to take advantage of your bonus, and then you realize, oh, I need spears. So it's a little harder to play. House hopping is a high skill trick to use. I mean, it's not hard to use. You can use it, but like abusing house hopping is a bit hard to do. So I'd probably put Khmer there. Yeah, I think that's fair. Next we have Koreans. I'm not a huge fan of the Civ at the moment. I think it's okay, but I think it just gets outperformed in a lot of cases. I'd probably put it right here though, right ahead of the Goths, because I think it has a good late game and it has like a decent skirm spear play, and it also has cheap CA which you can go into, but no bloodlines. So yeah, it always feels weird. I would say Koreans is an anti-meta Civ in the sense that you have to play with like towers or wagons or maybe phosphor rush or something like that to get the most out of the Civ. Otherwise, you're just playing like a very slow archer Civ that doesn't have the craziest late game. The late game is just, it's good, but it's not crazy. So I don't like just like playing slow and steady with Koreans, because then come late game, you're just going to get raided to death usually by more mobile Civs. Next up, you have Lithuanians. I think that Civ is quite solid. I probably will put it top of B or bottom of A. I think I'm going to throw it in the B tier, though. It's good. It gets off to a good start. But if you don't get the relics, the Civ is kind of generic. And I think CA Civs and Camel Civs usually do very well against Lithuanians, because they get to contest the map and prevent Lith from getting relics, which is where I think the problem comes for the Civ. And I also think the Lithuanian late game is not that crazy, because you miss +2 attack on Halb, and the way you get armor is also weird. You have to get the unique tech. So Civ just feels weird to play in general. In the late game. You do have Winged Hussar, which is nice, but lacking the +2 attack makes it so it's like a generic Hussar with a bit of extra stats. I think the Civ is good. Yeah, but it's just not crazy. Like, I want the Civ to be crazy. It's really fun to play. But if you don't get relics, it's not crazy. If you get relics and you get the lightest, those units are insane. Like the lightest with extra attack is insane. But yeah, nothing too crazy there. If you don't get that. Next, you have Magyars. I think this Civ is solid. I'd probably throw it ahead of the Huns. If your opponent doesn't full wall and you can get Scout Rush with Magyars, it's really good. I think you should open Scouts with Magyars 99% of the time. And you need to have a really good reason to not open Scouts with it, because Scouts are naturally a good opening, and Magyars get 2 bonuses for Scouts, And scouts leads into CA, which Magyar is really good at, or scouts can lead into knights or into leg half, which Magyar is really good at. You also have Arbalest if you want. You know, if you're up against Camel Civs, you have Arbalest, full upgrades, nothing wrong with it. And you have a really good late game. So I think this civ is just solid overall. Perfect example of a viable civ if you like that scout style. Next up, we have Malay. This is like probably a really nice example of like an anti-meta civ. In some ways, I think if you really make use of the civ, it's very strong. I'd probably put it right here. You have to make use of your timings from age to age, and you also have to make use of like, you don't have like a crazy good late game. You have like a decent late game, but you have to make use of very unique options like elephants, karambit warriors, you know, no gold costing 200 swordsmen. It's not like a generic late game. And the civ is not played out generically at all. It has a very weird build order that you have to go for. You know, I have a guide out there for Malay, definitely, that can help you with the early games with the build order. It's not that hard, but it's a little different than other civs, which is why I think the civ is a bit harder to play. But overall, I think if you do play it well, the Karambits getting free armor is really insane, and like for a fast sim scenario. Their monk tax is really nice, and I think their early game is quite good. Similarly to the Chinese, if you don't take damage, you're up 2 vils. Come Castle Age, if you get the Castle Age no damage, you're up another 3 vils. So if you get the Castle Age, you're up 5 vils if nothing bad happens. The problem is, sometimes, very often, bad things happen because the Malay is a bit weird early game. So that's how I feel about the Malay. Hard civ to play, but really good if you can master it. Next up, we have the Malians. This is probably right there, slightly worse than Lithuanians, but maybe slightly better. No, let's go slightly better. I was gonna say like they have less power than Lithuanians because Lithuanians have like a higher ceiling. If you get relics, you're golden, you're chilling. But I think Malians have a bit more like flexibility, a bit more options early game. Like, you know, you have camo, you have a slightly better economy bonus than Lithuanians. You save more resources come Castle Age. And the civ has like reasonable options, and on top of that, I think the Gebero is a very strong unique unit in the right cases. So yeah, civ feels like reasonably strong. Has a weird late game, but is a very good civ. All right, next up we got the Mayans. I think the Mayans are a really good candidate for OP tier, but I think I'm gonna have to drop them a little bit to right here. And the reason for that is Hindustani have a good matchup against them, and I also think Mayans have some really sleeper bad matchups. Like they're really weak to Goths. Randomly, like very randomly, and they also have like some weaknesses, like for example, you get no bombard cannon, no cav in late game, and if you run out of gold, your late game is nothing special with Mayans. You get like extra arrow with the skirm or extra javelin with the skirm, but besides that, you're playing like skirm halb with a couple eagles mixed in. That's your late game, which is nothing special. You don't really get any relic bonuses either, so the civ feels a bit lackluster in late game. But aside from that, if you have like gold, it's really good. Archer play, really strong. The economy of the civ feels insane. Like, I can't believe the civ never ever got any nerf, like, to its economy. Or maybe it did, I don't remember. The only nerf it got that I remember is like the obsidian arrows. But even that's like not really a nerf. Like the new tech is just as fine. You know, it's also decent. But yeah, Mayans are crazy good. It's one of my favorite civs in the game, and I think it just has a few bad matchups. I think it dies to OP civs and to Hindustani. But even to Hindustani, I think if you play it correctly, Mayans win. It's hot take. I've won my last like 3 Hindustani Mayan games with the Mayans, and I think that it beats Hindustani. But I think for lower brackets, like, if you don't play like smart against the civ, you will die to Golam really hard. So you have to play like extremely sharp and extremely aggressive to beat Hindustani with Mayans. Next up we have Mongols. This civ is the last S tier civ that I think I'm gonna have. This civ is really good. Basically, the idea with Mongols is that it's similar to Georgians in the sense that you always get off to a good start. You can't have a bad start with Mongols. You also get the initiative, and you play towards CA meta. Like, perfect. That you play towards CA in Castle Age or Mangadai, your late game's insane. The only difference between Mongols and Georgians that makes Georgians better, in my opinion, is Georgians have better economy in mid game. That's the only difference. Mongols also has a really good late game. They both have really good early game. Their mid game is similar with like Step Lancers and versus like, you know, Manaspa or Healing CA, Extra Firing CA. They have very similar approaches in the mid game. But the economy for Georgians with the church is a little bit better. So that's why Georgians are better. But otherwise, these 3 are your S tiers. And then Chinese, Chinese just simply, I think that they're a little bit better than Mongols if they face. Like, I think Chinese is a bit better than Mongols, but I think Mongols is easier to play. So that's kind of, I would put this as like my tier list, or like the top player tier list, like this. But for lower levels, I think Mongols are better than Chinese. But I think like this is completely fine. Next we have Persians. The Civ is very strong right now. I think I'm gonna put them right here. And the reason for that is the new edition. Yeah, probably here, realistically. The reason for that is that now with the Savar, they have a legit late game now. Like their late game is not hard, not easy to beat anymore. Before, when you had only the Paladin, Paladin takes longer to kick in than Savar, has less pierce armor, and is generally speaking a little bit easier to deal with. Savar is a nightmare for archer civs, like nightmare. It also beats cav archers, and it's also Persians is also a civilization that gets very far ahead in economy. And before, it was just a little bit too late getting to Paladin to finish the game. Savar comes in like, I think a minute earlier than Paladin, or like 45 seconds earlier than Paladin. And I swear to you, that 45-second timing window of just getting the Savar spike faster is usually just enough to win the game. And naturally, with Savar or Paladin play, you have to end the game fast, and Savar lets you do that better than Paladin, which is why I think Persians are a very strong civ. And aside from that, they have a really good early game. They're always up, a village or two. They get Parthian tactics and Castle Age, making their CA play, especially against other CA, very, very legit. So they fit nicely into the Cav/CA meta right now. Next up, we have Poles. If this was a personal tier list, I would throw this into the depths of the bad category, because I've been hating on the civilization recently. But because I want to make this tier list as objective as possible, I'm going to put the civilization at the bottom of subpar, something like right here. Okay? And the reason for that is that the Poles have the best late game in the game. Simple as that. But getting there is a nightmare. This civilization is very hard to use. You need to do the full work farms, which are really hard to make use of. And again, getting to Castle Age is usually gonna, be quite a tough task. And then once you do get there, you don't really have any bonuses. Like for the start of Castle Age, you only get bonuses when you start mining stone. You get a little bit of gold back, or when you get the unique tech to start spamming knights, or when you get to like a reasonable amount of farms to where your full work farms are like really kicking. The full work farms early are more of an inconvenience than anything. If you use the bonus, your farms are exposed. If you don't use it, your civ has no bonuses. So it feels very weird. But the Poles have a high ceiling and a good late game, which is why I give them some grace. Okay, and they also have a reasonable like CA play and reasonable like light calf play, especially with winged hussar, quite good. So the civ has some merit for it, for sure. Next up, we've got the Portuguese. I think the civilization is very good at the moment. Probably right there is perfect for it. And the way to play Portuguese is to spam as many gold units as possible. Pretty much. It does well with CA, does well with crossbow arbalest. As long as you're making gold units, you're good with the civ. Just don't make like skirm and light cav unless you need to. That's my advice with the civ. Late game is also very good. Doesn't really miss much. Victoria are not that good though. People think Victorias are amazing for 1v1s. I don't think they're that good. I think they're okay. So Victoria is okay. I think the best way to use Victoria is like fast in Victoria, if you can make that happen. I have a video about that against Viper. But I mean, it's like a random rank game, so it's like I don't think you can pull that off a lot. Or often, like it kind of was a little bit of a fluke. But if you can fast in Pretoria, they're insane. But aside from that, Portuguese are like a solid civ. And the more gold units that you play with, the better you're going to be doing, generally speaking. Next up, we have the Romans. Civ is solid, but I would probably put it like probably behind behind Magyars. Civ is solid, but just has some clear weaknesses, like no bombard cannon, no bracer. Makes it a little awkward to play late game sometimes. But I think if you play with like at lower elo brackets, you play with like men at arm with like extra armor is really good. Higher elo, you play like scout spear or archer spear, and you put a lot of pressure early and you have a good smooth economy behind it. That's a really good way to play Romans. And then you play with a lot of scorpions to counter CA or to play defensively. And then your late game is quite solid. Like Scorp, good, like decent siege, good cav, Centurion is solid, good infantry, Halb, Legionary. It's a solid like late game comp. Harder to play, but quite solid. Next up, we've got the Saracens. I'll probably throw the Saracens. I like them a lot. I'd probably throw them somewhere in the mid tier though. Probably right there. Because I think it's a camel civ that just does really well against all knight civs. It can also play CA very well. It can also play Arbalest very well. Has Mamluk that's very strong. It has a lot of really good options. I like the Saracens a lot. The market gets you out of tricky situations. There's really nothing bad to say about the civ, which is what I really like about Saracens. I don't even think of a single weakness about it. The only reason it's not higher up on the list is because it doesn't get any crazy bonus that's like gets you ahead or gets you wins by default. And that's the only downside to Saracens. No free wins, basically. Next up, we have the Sicilians. Oof. Okay, this might be another bad civ. But I've been playing with the sergeants and the donjons, and I regret to inform you, they are actually quite solid. So I would say this civilization is probably right here, maybe right here. I think it has a lot of merit with the donjons and the sergeants, either in feudal age as like a tower rush, and you make it messy, or with the fast castle like the U-pudding style or like the phosphorus style, like, you know, all in sergeants. You try to get the castlage really fast, and then like no economy, all in push. Either of those two approaches, and even late game sergeants and donjons sneaking on the side and going like First Crusade, I think that unit is really good. And I think it meshes really well with what Sicilians want to do. The problem though is that you can't always play that style. And without that style, Sicilians have very little going for them. Their economy kicks in, their economy bonuses kick in too late, which is why I think the civ is like quite weak, and their options are not that crazy. I think if you give Sicilians thumb ring, all of a sudden the civ has a lot more options to go for and becomes a much better civ. But right now, like Arbalest is not really a good late game option. Cavalier with Hoburg are like not bad, but it's so expensive and it's not that crazy. Like it's probably weaker than Paladin against most things. So I don't think the civilization is that good besides sergeants and donjons. But if you play that, it's not bad. So it has potential, but for now I'd put it in the subpar category. Next up we've got the Slavs. Similar to Romans, probably slightly better or weaker than Romans. I mean, it's kind of whatever you want. They're very similar civ. I'll put them slightly above Romans because I think they've got slightly better options. They get Hussar. Their farming bonus is going to be a bit better in late game. You know, they get the siege bonus, I think, which applies to more than just Scorpions, which is nice. So they're very similar civ to Romans, though. Same thing I said about Romans, I'll say it about Slavs. You get ahead early, and then you can play, you know, you have like some awkward units to use, but if you play with like Heavy Scorpion or Siege Onager or something, you can make something work, and then you also have really good infantry with Jushina. Next we have Spanish. I'm going to put that as the king of the subpar tier list. If you play the civ correctly, it's really good. Conquistadors can even beat Manaspa, believe it or not. So the civ has such a high ceiling, but it also has weaknesses. Like it can just die to like any one of these C tier civs or any one of these B tier civs because they just have better economy bonuses and they respect conks and don't die to conks, and all of a sudden Spanish are nothing special. Although I will say Spanish villagers and Spanish late game in general in Imperial Age, quite solid. Respectable. Very good. Next up, we've got the Tatars. I think the civilization is one of the better CA civs, so naturally going to be quite high up on the list. But I wouldn't class it much higher than this because the civ doesn't feel like that good. You don't get that many crazy savings early. You don't get that many bonuses. You only get power spikes and like castlage with free thumb ring, some sheep bonus early. But where I think the Tatars shine is in impeccable late game, very strong mid game, late game. Sorry, with Cav Archer and heavy CA. Sorry, with heavy CA and Hussar or Cav Archer. That's what I meant to say. This civ just really shines in late game. You get extra armor on both. You know, you get really good upgrades. Civ is fantastic in that regard. And I think it has nice power spikes to get you there as well. And the hill bonus is very nice. You know, to take good engagements. So Civ feels really good for the meta, but nothing like absolutely crazy. It feels fair to play with and against. Teutons, this Civ is really weak right now because Cav Archers are super popular. If Cav Archers are popular, Teutons will always be weak. I think the Civ is probably somewhere here. I still think it has a bit more merit than Celts, though, because you do get a nice tower rush option. You do get really... I'd probably put above Poles, realistically, guys. I can't stand Poles. Personal bias taking over. But yeah, I think Teutons have a fair tower rush, and I think you have a decent economy to where you can play like Archer Skirm, good economy, and then switch to Paladin to beat the CA, and then try to beat them before they get the Imperial Age kind of angle there. And I think you also have like a really nice like forward castle, get crenellations, and then you have like a castle on the forward hill that's hard to shake. You have like a really nice like stronghold style game with the Teutons, which I think can be good. And in like Knight Pike versus Knight Pike, Teutons usually do pretty well because you get extra armor. But usually, like I said, they go CA and you die, which is why they're not higher up on the list. Next, you have Turks. My Turk win rate is my highest win rate. Do you know what my win rate is? I think my win rate's like 89 or 90% across like 100 games with the Civ. It's ridiculous. I don't lose to Turks. I don't know why. The Civ is not even that good, but I have an insane win rate with the Civ. I still think, like, objectively speaking, I wouldn't put it much higher than this. I think I'd probably put it slightly above the Slavs. Just because I think that the extra Pierce armor on the light cav destroys Archer Civs, and the CA destroys cav Civs. The problem, though, is that when you're playing against Civs that are like faster, have better economy bonuses, sometimes they can just counter your good options. Like Ethiopians against Turks. Okay, light cap to counter crossbow, but then you get free pike, so you mix in a few pikemen or a couple camel, and then you just push with crossbow camel, and then because you get extra res with Ethiopians, you can do that before Turks are ready to defend, and then the Turks will suffer. That's how I see Turks. Because they lack counter units like skirmishers and pikemen, if your good options with Turks don't come in fast enough, you suffer and you take damage, and that's how you lose games with the Civ. Next up, we have Vietnamese. This is one of my favorite civilizations right now. It's so good to just get the CA with the Civ. I made a whole video about how the Civ is really good for beginners as well. I think the civilization is somewhere like maybe even right here. I think I'd prefer that to Byzantine even. The Civ is very strong. It can play Scout into Skirm, Scout into CA, it can play Archer opening, it can play Skirm Spear opening. The late game is insane with Imp Skirm, Light Cav, Bombard Cannon, Rattan Archer, even Elephants if you need. Halberdier is all good. You have everything you need with the Civ. It's really, truly missing nothing. And I think the Civ is, yeah, just an amazing one all around. Next we have Vikings. I think the Civ has a really good win rate actually, which is fun, but I don't think the Civ is actually that great at the moment. The best thing is, undeniably the economy. Obviously it's very good. But besides the economy, it just doesn't have very meta options. Like infantry, weak. It's late game, by the way. I hate the Viking late game is so decent. Alright? It's decent. The Berserks are decent, the champions are decent, chieftains is decent, but it's so expensive. Like chieftains cost an arm and a leg, and it's an infantry upgrade. So it's so expensive to get to your late game, and at the end of the day, it's only decent, which is why I hate the Civ in some capacity. You're also lacking bombard cannon, lacking thumb ring, but you have the extra attack on the Arbalest. It's not the worst. Overall, I think the Civ is fine. I'd probably throw it somewhere in the B tier. You kind of have to play anti-meta because you can't get to a classic late game. Because then you lose to all the meta comps. You lose to heavy CA Hussar, you get raided. You lose to Arbalest Bombard Cannon because you died a Bombard Cannon. So you have to like go forward castle, look for a faster imp, Arbalest, faster imp, forward castle, Treb, something weird like that. But I'd probably throw the Vikings right here. They'd probably beat like the weaker civs just because they're getting so far ahead in economy. But they die to the better civs because they usually have weaker units, or the better civs can just like grind them out to late game and then beat them in late game. Okay, that's my tier list. Looking back on it, I'm very happy with it. I'm so sorry that Bulgarians are the only civ in the bad category, but like, if you objectively speaking, okay, like Bulgarian copy pasta aside, objectively speaking, every one of these civilizations can beat Bulgarians. Bulgarians have 0 good matchups. The only matchups they have that are like decent is like against Aztecs and like against some of like the cav civs, I guess. But even then, like you don't have hand cannoneer, so you die against halb hand cannoneer. You die against any unique unit like Spanish. You die against everything with it. You die to CA. Like any civ with the eco bonus in CA beats Bulgarians. If you go meta arm, the guy always goes archers, by the way. Like that's why it just doesn't work. Anyway, I can go on and on about that. But Bulgarians are probably the worst in the game right now. I might make a video separate on them just to fuel the hate, but I don't know, maybe not. But again, those civs, even Bulgarians, can still work in lower brackets, guys. Don't say, oh, I love Bulgarians, but I have to stop playing them at 300 elo because Hera said that they're not good. If you like to play them, guys, just play them. It doesn't matter. Trust me, it still can win at lower brackets. A lot of its weaknesses are only exploited at higher brackets and higher elos anyways, okay? But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Make sure to check me out on Twitch and Patreon. Patreon is good for the guides, like the Georgian Scott Rush I mentioned. I have a guide on that. Malay Builder, I have a guide on that. It's all on Patreon, guys. So if you want to get better, check out the Patreon. Link in the description below. And if you want to, check out my streams and chill with us on the live stream, check out the link to the Twitch below. So Twitch, Patreon, check me out there. And as always, thanks for watching and have a nice day. Peace.